Okay, hello everyone. I've seen you saying hello in the box, so just to say thank you very much for joining. As Tamas was saying, my name is Paul Borseya. I'm a training consultant, but also advisor for safeguarding in Europe. And today we will do this webinar, but it's not going to be a lecture. Today we'll do a very practical webinar. Why? Since I've joined Terre des Hommes, we have realized that we all read a lot of things about safeguarding, but how about applying them in practice? So that's why today I would like us to try and do, and I know it's going to be very difficult, but let's try and do a dialogue about safeguarding. We do have a number of slides. We do have some tools as well. We do have information about safeguarding, but also I would like you to post questions. So in the chat box, if you see that something is interesting, or if you want to make a comment about something that I'll be saying, for example, if you feel that it resonates with you because of the work that you currently do, or if you have any questions, if something is unclear, please post a question, because at the end of this webinar, I will also be trying to answer those questions. I often invite people to think about very difficult questions, such as, how do I know that what I've seen is safeguarding or is not safeguarding? Also, another question could be, how do I know that I've answered correctly? And how do I know that at the end of my intervention, the child is safer? Yeah, so please consider these types of questions. Well, let's get going and see what we'll be achieving today. First of all, we will be looking at some of the latest research, because there are new developments in safeguarding, and you will see some of these developments, they come from England, but also I can say that they apply to wherever we are, not just in Europe, but in the world, because we know that some children suffer abuse, suffer neglect, suffer other types of abuse, and these terminologies could be used to us as well. And but we'll do a poll on that, and we'll see to what extent you feel that they apply to you. We will look at perspectives, ways to address or to respond to safeguarding, and also that very important question: how do we do risk management? How do I know that I've assessed the risk and then also I've responded to the risk? And the last but not the least, we will have at least 3 tools that will help us with the professional judgment. I know from my experience as a practitioner and as a manager in child protection, I know that when I had tools that made sense to me, they helped me to understand and they helped me to make the right decision how to act or what to do to make sure that the child is safer. So what I would like us to do, and what I would like to invite you to do, please think about this one question. When we think about a child being at risk or the safety of children, to what extent at the end of the work you've done with that child or with the family, you could say hand on heart the child is safer. That's what we should say all the time when we identify and when we address safeguarding. Now, let's get going and see what we are doing today. Let's say about safeguarding, we have some good definitions, and Terre des Hommes has put together this definition on safeguarding. It is the responsibility that we have as an organization to make sure that our staff, our operations, our programs, and through everything we do, we are not harming or hurting the children. And we know, for example, that or some people could argue that this is narrowing the definition of safeguarding. Why? Because it speaks only about our employees or our partners abusing or neglecting children. But at Terre des Hommes, we only address this topic for today. For the other topics like child abuse, physical abuse, sexual, I'm sure there are other opportunities through the child. But this is what we'll be looking at today. Now, why do we do that? Because we have seen recently, and probably not just recently, we have seen situations when some professionals who were in position of powers, why? Because they work with children, they were supposed to keep children safe, but unfortunately a small number abuse children. We can talk about sexual abuse, we can talk about neglect, we can talk about physical or emotional abuse, and also more recently, we can talk about misuse of substances, drugs, alcohol, and also we can talk about gang activity, for example, and we'll see how that feature in this presentation. Now, another thing that I would like to highlight to enable us to start reflecting is with regard to the issues that continue to happen again and again. So what we have seen, whenever a child is abused or neglected, there seems to be failure to share information. So what do you mean by that? Sometimes I might see that something happened, but because I'm not fully aware, I don't know how to respond, I don't know who to contact, or simply I am too scared to even think about that issue because it is something pretty bad. Sometimes we don't share that information. And because of that, we are leaving the child in a very difficult and risky situation, and children will continue to suffer. We have a lot of research on this. We have research about neglect, for example, that says that the impact of neglect on the child's health development is far greater than what we thought or what we've known before. The second one is about the start again syndrome. What do we mean by that? It means that we do an intervention, but then we drop our service. Then we do another intervention, then we start again and again and again. But when we do that, practically we do not address the whole issue. And that's why if you feel that you've done something in a situation of safeguarding, let's ask that question that I said earlier. Is the child safe or safer because of what I've done? Because if not, we should not stop our intervention. We should continue until we can say hand on heart, the child is safe. The third point where it talks about the healthy skepticism. This is one of the best skills that we have when we talk about safeguarding, when we talk about identifying and exploring it. Some people refer to this as professional curiosity. Now, to what extent, for example, when we have found out that the child is at risk, we asked ourselves one question. Do I understand the lived experience of the child of abuse or neglect? And do I know, for example, a day in that child's life? Now, what we've seen from research, from the serious case review, for example, we've seen that once we asked and once we answered that question, once we understood the lived experience of the child, we were in a better situation to act and through our actions than we stopped the abuse and we made sure that the child was safe or safer. The fourth element there is about the failure to challenge. We know in our job, we do talk to each other. We are supposed to talk to professionals. We are supposed to confront the people that actually put children at risk. But to what extent do I feel that I've got the skills and the abilities? Because if, for example, if I am less confident, let's say I've got less years of experience, if sometimes my manager or senior manager has done something that indicates child abuse, to what extent I feel that I'm strong enough and confident enough to challenge and to confront. We know at the Zone we can say proudly that when we've identified any types of safeguarding concerns, we can say that we have addressed them and we made sure that no child was actually left in the situation of harm. The other element there is the rule of optimism. Sometimes we might say that, oh, but it has happened, but it was okay-ish. And when we say it was okay-ish, we believe that by us not doing something, the situation is going to get better. Now, from past experience, when we thought that the situation will get better, the children or the child remained in risk situations and the children continue to suffer and we haven't done our job to keep them safe. Poor assessments. We've also seen that sometimes we know what to do or some other times we have no clue how to assess safeguarding. And when that happens, again, we lose the focus on the child and we are doing other things. We might do something that on paper could look okay, but in terms of assessing the safeguards in situation, we haven't done a good job. Children not at the center of the process. To what extent, when we assess safeguarding, actually we focus on the child and everything we do is about the child, rather than being diverted by the perpetrators, by those that abuse the children, by those that engineer our focus away from the children. And then the last point there is, to what extent, when you identify any safeguarding concerns, you've got support from your managers. And we can talk here about supervision, but also we can talk formal supervision, but also we can talk about the support or the reflective discussions that we should all be having when we keep children safe. Now, the reason why we have these issues on the screen is to make sure that we understand from these lessons and also to pose a question. We know about these issues being our failures when we address safeguarding, but they still continue to happen. And for us as reflective practitioners, we should consider what can I do to change that? Because this is not acceptable. If, for example, I'm not putting the child at the center, if I'm not being curious, I'm not challenging, one child that I'm aware that suffers will continue to suffer. And here we need to consider this from 2 points of view. As a human being, am I happy to know that a child is suffering? I hope we all say no to that. As a professional, I've got a responsibility. So why is it that we still don't act on it? And the answer could be, or could be lack of knowledge, it could be lack of skills, but also what I would like us to do today, or to start doing today, is to create a momentum in which we'll be saying, this is not acceptable, we can do something, and we know what to do. There was a very interesting question there, how to support well an abused child as a psychologist. Thank you for that question, Teka. It is a very good question, and we know all of us, irrespective of our roles, we can do something. The first thing to do is, let's listen to the child. Let's listen to the voice of the child, but not as a ticker box exercise. It's first of all, in the child's world, what does it mean? And a simple question, tell me, child, in your own words, what has happened to you? Because I would like to understand. And there is a very, very nice English word which can be translated in all European languages at least. I wonder. I am curious. I wonder what has happened to your child, because if I wonder, hopefully the children will give us a lot of information for us to be worried or less worried. But if I'm worried, I know that I can do and I have to do something. So the answer is, it could be in the child-centered approach, when we look at the child and we consider the child and everything we do is for the child. And then then beyond that, it's also, let's talk to each other as professionals. I have seen something as a psychologist, but also that child attends education. Probably the teacher has seen something as well. Probably there is a doctor, probably there is a counselor. Why not? Let's get together, all of us, and let's all put all the evidence on the table, because based on past experience, when we do this, sometimes we call them multi-agency meetings. When we do this, practically we are seeing that we all contribute to the same puzzle. And at the end of the day, we can say, are we worried or are we not worried? And then if we are worried, we can make the right action to answer and to support the child who has been abused or who's been neglected. There's another question there. How do we protect the person reporting any abuse from any harm of the perpetrator? Very good question, Diana. And the answer is, let's link that to what we know about physical abuse, for example. In a case of physical abuse, if the child discloses that mom and dad beat them up last night because of whatever reasons, if we do not step in to actually protect the child, meaning that we go and address the situation, meaning that we involve the police, meaning that we report the case to children's services, meaning that sometimes, in rare cases, children could be removed from the family homes because of the physical abuse. But if we don't do that, the child is likely to go home. And because the child dared to speak about being physically abused, what happens after that, the child will be abused even more. Why? Because they dared to speak up about it. So again, another very good question there. Can case management be effective in helping children at risk? I think case management, that is his purpose, to actually support with that. But now the case management, let's see it like, let's look at the steps of case management. First of all, we recognize abuse, we respond to abuse, we report abuse, we record abuse, and then we also review abuse. To me, case management should have these 5 R's or 5 steps. And as I said, at the end of that, it should say the child is now safe. We'll come back to some of the questions later. I would like us to move now to see how you feel about this question. Safeguarding children, meaning we keep children safe at all times. It's a complex, unstable, temporal, and messy job or messy thing. What do you think? Agree or disagree? And please write in the box to see how many people agree or disagree with these statements. Okay, which seems to have 4 disagrees there, 5 disagrees. Okay, so let's see how complex, and let's take them one by one. How easy do we find? I think everybody's saying disagree. I'm waiting to see if anyone says actually agree with that. Any balanced view there? No? Okay, still disagree. Complex, in terms of complexity, let's think how easy it is to all of us to actually identify abuse. And it is one of the most difficult jobs. It's a very difficult job. And let's think, sometimes we might say, I see a child with a bruised eye, and the child might say, my father did it last night. Our first response could be, it is child abuse. But what happens if we have a discussion with the child? So again, putting the child at the center. And when we might say, okay, child, please explain to me, tell me in your own words, how did this happen last night? Sometimes probably the child might say, my father was very angry. He had alcohol. He was very upset with mom. And when I said or did something, and then he punched me. So from that point of view, it is a clear sign of physical abuse. However, what if when we ask the child the same question, so tell me how it happened in your own words, the child might say, actually, we did play fighting last night. We had a wonderful time. But in the end, when I got up, my father got up as well, and he caught my eye with his elbow. Straight away, that's not abuse. So, but this is one of those cases when we can say straight away one or the other. Now, let's think about emotional abuse. How easy is it to all of us to actually evidence emotional abuse? I remember being in court to try to evidence emotional abuse cases, and it is the most difficult task to actually do, because whatever we say, it's our interpretation of a behavior, of something that I've seen or something that I've heard. And that's why we are saying that overall, safeguarding children is very, very complex. We also know that, for example, most children don't tell us about abuse. To link this to sexual abuse, for example, which we know, we've heard about sexual abuse Oxfam case, for example. And there are other organizations who were investigated because their staff sexually abused children. Now, just to give you some statistics from the UK, over 1 year, there is almost 750,000 children calling Childline, and Childline in a safe space to speak. They call Childline to report sexual abuse. So it could be from indecent touching, sexting, all the way to penetration. So when these children call us, we also ask them another question. We ask them, have you spoken to anyone else about what you're just sharing with us? Meaning allegation or indication of sexual abuse. More than 500,000 children are saying, no, we haven't spoken to anyone else. And also, in addition to that, we know that we only work with the tip of the iceberg in terms of the cases. There are so many cases that still go unreported. So from that point of view, it is complex to recognize, and also it's very complex to respond as well. Now, in terms of unstable and temporal, let's see what we think about that. Because let's say, can you all think about the last time you've been to do a session with a child or with a family? Now, ideally would be at the end of that session for me to say hand on heart that that child is safe, and those parents are keeping the child safe or safer. But to what extent can I say that that happens few hours later or few days later? We cannot say that. We cannot say that 100% the child is safe or safer. What we can say is that at the end of that session, yes, I've got enough evidence to say that, but what happened between then and this moment, it's impossible for us to say. I'll give you an example. There was one girl one day, and this one girl said at school that the father had found us, meaning her and mommy, but also she's supposed to say that the father doesn't come to our house anymore. So straight away in this situation, what is it? It was domestic violence. The child told us this statement, and the mother and the daughter were in a refugee setting. So in a Women's Aid domestic violence refugee setting. However, in this situation, we haven't acted, and guess what? A few days later, the father found them and murdered both of them. So that's why whatever we put in place with safeguarding, we should always try and think about the possible risks. Is it likely to go somewhere else? Is the child safe? Is the protective parent safe? Or if not, what else can I do to promote safety? Now, why else do we feel that it's complex, unstable, temporal, and messy? And I remember, as a kind of funny story, I could say that when I got the place at the Social University, my father told me one thing: Paul, congratulations, you've just decided to do the hardest job in the whole world. And that's not something that I expected. But when I said, look, tell me why do you say that? And he said, it is the most difficult job, Paul, because for the rest of your life, you will be working with people. Now, when we work with people who are resistant. We work with people who don't want to engage with us. We work with people who sometimes are in our face. Let's imagine, I spoke about confronting perpetrators. Let's say that one of our team members probably did something towards abusing a child within our organizations. And you are the person that actually go and confronts them in, let's say, in a safe environment. What if that person is very much aggressive in your face, shouting, swearing, and probably coming so close to you and threatening you if you disclose that to somebody else? In that situation, how would we feel? It's going to be emotional impact. It's going to be pretty much instability, and also it will become very, very messy. Yeah, and that's why please consider that. To what extent is it like this? We can only apply this in our practice. Yeah, so please, as a challenge to you after this webinar, think about any of your cases and answer it using those 4 words there and see what we get from it. Now, other things that we have here on the slides, in terms of models, how to respond to safeguarding. And we have here a very interesting model, and this is based on Kolb. Kolb has talked a lot about experiential learning cycle. And he said that in order for us to respond to situations of keeping children safe, we need to look at these 4 elements: see, plan, do, and review. What do we mean by it? When we talk about see, is what is the issue, the problem, or the need? Of course, if you are concerned that a child is hurting or is being abused, you have seen something to indicate to you that somebody has done something or is likely to do something towards the child. Now, when this is happening in the work context, and also in the family context, sometimes you might be able to clearly describe what the issue is. Some other times we might feel like saying, I've seen something, it is very, very odd, it's very, very weird, and I cannot put my finger on it. It's as simple as that. I don't know how to interpret that. And that's why in that moment, the most important thing is to consider the second question: who will I contact? Who else can I talk to? Who else can I get with me in the same room to discuss about what I've seen and try to understand, am I right or am I wrong? Because it might be that I'm wrong, but what if I'm right? And by us doing that, practically we are doing the first step in actually keeping the child safe or safer, because we are looking towards the child's protection. So that's the part with seeing, and that's how we'll start being curious when we gather more information. The next tab there, it's speaking about the plan. Who are the best professionals to be involved? Now, it might be, let's say, in that situation when one of our partners or employees of our partners indicates risk to children. Who do we contact? I need to be so careful to choose who actually we contact, to share the information, to gather more information, and also to see what can professionals do. I know at Bernardo's, but at Terre des Hommes, we have a clear thinking in terms of partners, and we are saying that if our partners have done something to abuse children, we will discuss it with them, and if they don't change that, if they don't ensure that they protect children or they keep children safe, we will end the partnerships. And that is good practice on our side. But also we go one step beyond that. We are sharing with our partners our safeguarding policy. We are giving them tools. We are sometimes training them. Why? So they know how they can respond to these sorts of concerns. The other question there is, how best can these professionals meet the needs? And that's why we should probably send a message to everyone. Based on what you're doing, Paul, with that situation, can you say hand on heart that the child is safe? If you can say yes, Paul, that's fine. If you cannot say that, Paul, then you need to go back and review what you've done and try and work a little bit better to see what else we can do. Now, there is an interesting question there. What degrees need to have to deal with abused children? Very good question. So thank you again, Teka, for asking the question. We know that there are some statutory agencies like social workers and police. So they are the statutory agencies or professionals who, we know for the police, there is a learning journey, and there is obviously the way to become a policeman. For the social workers, I can say that yes, you need to get a degree from the university, or in some countries, you can get a master course, and then that will recognize that you can work with children. But for me, it's a little bit beyond that, because for me, I know I manage teams of qualified social workers with degrees, but also I had what we are calling social work assistants or assistants that work within the same team. Now, with regard to responding, of course, we are saying that the ones that have qualification to respond should respond. But also we have assistants sometimes recognizing abuse, and they need to know one thing. So given that they don't know how to respond to that situation of abuse, but they should speak to their senior colleagues and then together to decide about how concerned we actually are. Now, in the UK, we have a very good training called Joint Investigation Training. Now, Terre des Hommes, I know at Terre des Hommes, last year, we've done a training of trainers when we've done exactly that, how to respond. And we can say at Terre des Hommes, we have safeguarding focal points in the European countries where we actually function. And for example, I don't know exactly which organization you're coming from, TECA, but in terms of the support for training, Terre des Hommes can actually help with that. So try and see whether you have Terre des Hommes in your area, whether you can identify the safeguarding local focal point there, and then from there, see how they can support you with this. So degrees do help, but we all have an experience, we all have a duty to respond, given that we work in this area of work. Now, can only social workers and police deal with the safeguarding of children? Very good question. Now, it depends in which country you are. Based on what I know from England, they are the ones that investigate and that respond to situation of safeguarding. Now, if you are in other countries, it would be good for you to liaise with the local authority child protection officers there or agencies, and just to see how do we respond to that. I am also aware that in some of the countries, we do have very good NGOs. We have World Vision, we have Save the Children, we have SOS Children's Villages, we have a lot of organizations, and within those organizations there are very, very skilled practitioners, and it could be psychologists, educational psychologists, counselors who are actually trained in responding to situations of safeguarding. Now, ideally would be, given the topic for today, safeguarding of children, ideal would be that every organization where you're part of, they should have a safeguarding focal point who is up to date with everything in terms of safeguarding and who can guide you and who can tell you what to do, given that you address this topic with them and you tell them that you are concerned about the safety of a certain child. Now, in terms of doing, who will lead on the plan and why? And this is pretty much linked into the previous questions: social workers, police, who else? What are we going to change, improve, or strengthen? Now, what I would like you to consider as a question from this webinar is, if or should you be concerned about a child's safety, start with the question. If nothing changes, if I don't do anything in this situation, what are the likely outcomes for that child? And then the answer can go in two different ways. The answer could be, if I do nothing, if the situation then is better for the child, then probably we are not concerned and we don't have any base for our concerns. However, if your answer is, if I don't do anything, the likely outcome for the child are worse, which means that the child will remain at risk, the child will continue to be abused, then of course, in that situation, we know that we need to act, we need to do something. Yeah, so always this question, if I don't do anything right now, is it going to be better or worse for the child? And that should be the first question that should be considering. And then in terms of what are we going to change or improve or strengthen, we know, we talked about sexual abuse. If that's a situation, or physical abuse or neglect or emotional abuse, if that's a situation, we know that what we should change, we should do our best for the child or the children to be safer, which means we need to stop the abuse straight away. I can give you an example from what we've done in Terre des Hommes. We were in a school one day, somewhere in Europe, and we have seen a teacher, a head teacher at the school, a principal, actually slapping a child. Slapping a child is a form of physical abuse. It's completely unacceptable. We should not do that. And it's as simple as that. And what we know, what we've done in that situation, our worker, they went and they spoke to the teacher and they spoke very clearly, this is abuse, this should not happen. It should end here and now. And then, of course, we had to use our internal communication channels to talk about this and to see what other measures or what else do we need to put in place to ensure that the child or the children are safer. Now, the final part there, it's a very interesting one, reviewing the plan. Why do we need to review the plan? Because it might be, and if you go back to the top one, I've seen something, I've identified the concerns, I've talked to other professionals, and sometimes you might feel, I've reported the case and now the situation is going to be better. How do we know that? What reassures us that by us reporting the case to somebody else, to a local authority child protection agency, the situation is better? We don't know that unless we have meaningful feedback from those professionals. That's why what we are saying is that it is good practice whenever you signpost to others always ask them, tell me please, what will you do with that? Because I would like to understand now that the child is safer, given that we address the concerns. Now, if you don't have any feedback, I'm sure we will all remain concerned there. I'll give you an example. I might be from a school or from an organization, identify that the child is at risk. Let's say the teacher or the head teacher slapped the child and also kicked the child, so a form of physical abuse. I'm reporting that, and I don't know what's going to happen next. How well will I sleep that night, given that the child will go in the same school tomorrow and the child might get the same treatment? Just as a human being, not as a professional, I'm not going to sleep well. I will still be worried. Yeah? And that's why we are saying always review the plan to make sure that based on what you've done, the child is safe or the child is safer in those given circumstances. So please, for safeguarding, consider these questions that you've got in front of you and always use them to make sure that you respond in a child-centered approach, but also you respond in a multi-agency approach, meaning that you work with others, and it could be work with others internally, but also outside from your organization, meaning child protection agencies, and yes, also reporting to the police if it is imminent harm to that child. Now, what I would like to ask next, and I know we only have 1 hour and it's already gone, half an hour is already gone, time flies when you talk about safeguarding. What I would like to ask, and please think about when, if any of you have been in that situation, when a child was exposed to risk, so a child was unsafe because of something any of us have done as professionals rather than keeping the child safe. Think about your emotions. What emotions did you experience and how did you manage those emotions? I'm just going to pause for 1 minute for you to write in there what emotions have you experienced if children are vulnerable and not safe, and let's see what we've done in those situations.
In the meantime, Paul, just to remind you that there is 2 new questions in the chat.
Is it for this one?
Nope, for the previous one.
Okay. Yep, I'm looking at the questions now. We'll just wait to see whether you will put any reflections about your emotions, please, because we know safeguarding does impact on us. And whilst we wait for the questions, whilst we wait for our comments there, just to share with you one of my experiences. One day, I was just about to address a situation when somebody has abused a child, and that person was far louder than I will ever be. That person was far stronger, and that person was a senior manager. Okay, I remember when I first stepped towards this person's office to go and have a discussion with them, I felt very, very small. Why? Because I knew that that could lead to the end of my career, because I was actually going there to challenge about some behavior which meant exposing a child. So how do we manage these emotions? It's a question that we need to consider. We have there frustration sometimes from Diana and talking about these emotions with somebody close or a therapist. Okay, it's a very good point there, Diana. Thank you for raising it. Now let's see how many of us actually have the privilege, and I'm very mindful to call it privilege, to have a therapist, or let's say clinical supervision, some might of us actually call it, and to be able to vent those feelings. Because in these days and ages when it's very, very, this service is very expensive, only a few of us can actually have something like that, therapeutic clinical supervision or a therapeutic intervention there. That's why the first part of your answer, Diana, with regard to support from staff or from your colleagues, that's definitely one of the most important one. So we should consider who is my rock in that team, who is the person that can support me, the person that I can be honest with and talk about these things, but also to what extent my manager actually can support me as well, given that is not my manager who actually posed risk to children. Ahmed also spoke about, I do some activities of self-care that can manage and mitigate the projection of emotions, therapy or third party. You're very lucky, Ahmed, to actually have this training to be able to do the self-care. We know probably some of us have some experience. We can do yoga, you can do other activities to relax, but also if you don't have that, what do you do? And the answer is indeed in your colleagues. For me, I remember, for example, my first practice tutor, Paul, his name was also Paul. I remember that Paul was very good to ask me the right questions for me to manage my emotions so I can actually move on. I can actually identify my emotions and also cope with my emotions and learn from what I've experienced in both situations. But please consider that. Why? We know, for example, if you go through very intense emotions, sometimes when we are looking for information, for evidence, it might actually prevent us from being very efficient in gathering ground intelligence. And it might be, sometimes it might be in the ambiguous information, missing, or assumptions. And we know in safeguarding, we know we are saying, do not use assumptions. We do not do assumptions when we keep children safe. We should always be in ground intelligence. But in the real activity of practicing safeguarding, what we also know is that often we will never ever know all the information that we might need. Sometimes it could be missing information, something could be very ambiguous, and also sometimes we do have the gut feeling, and we are being taught to trust our gut feeling. There was a situation in England when a nursery educator sexually abused a 3-year-old girl. So that is a safeguarding incident that happened here. Now, the staff in that nursery, the other educators, they noticed something. They have seen that something was not right. And they used their gut feeling when they identified when there were odd behaviors, strange behaviors, which this guy was doing. And what was he doing? Often he was found in the kitchen area with the door locked with the same 3-year-old girl. So that was a very odd behavior. He shouldn't do it like that. There is no reason why an adult professional should be closed in a room with just one child. Why would they do that? So that was the odd behavior. Now what they did is they tried to tackle it. But what was very interesting was the response of this sexual abuse perpetrator, because in the end, we found out that this guy sexually abused the 3-year-old girl, and actually he recorded himself on video penetrating this 3-year-old girl. Now, when the other staff were worried, they raised the concerns, they spoke about it, they reported it through the channels of reporting the concerns. But how did he respond to that? He made a counter allegation that he felt that they were doing something to abuse the children. Now, what happened in the end? The inspectors were very good at looking at all the evidence, and they quickly unmasked what was happening, and they identified that he was a sexual abuse predator. And then when the police investigated this case, so beyond the internal investigation, they found out that practically this guy was a sexual abuse groomer. He was grooming a high number of young girls over the internet, and he's used a very, very interesting technique. He was getting in touch with young girls. He was being very, very charming, and he was saying to them, "Oh, show me your breast. Oh, show me your bum. Oh, show me whatever." And when the girls were doing that, and these were teenage girls, these were girls probably 11, 12, 13, all the way to 16, he was very IT literate, and he was actually doing screenshots. He was recording the videos of what they were doing, and that was the material that he's used after that to groom them further. The next day or the next few days, he was sending that girl back the picture of her boobs, for example, of her breast, and then he was saying, "Now I've got this on you. If you don't want this to go viral for everybody to see it over the internet, I want you to masturbate in front of the camera for me." And this is how he's groomed many, many, many girls. Now, another interesting fact about this case, before he's gone to this nursery, when he sexually abused this 3-year-old girl, he's gone to another nursery. And they started to feel something there, but they haven't done anything about it because he submitted his resignation. And the learned message from here is, if you're worried about a member of staff, even if it's not evidence, what you need to do is you cannot just dismiss that person. In England, it's a very good system, for example. What do we do here is we have a service called the Disclosing and Barring Service, in which if somebody leaves my organization, then I'm informing the DBS, and then they will have the guy in the database. So if that person goes at another organization tomorrow, they will access the database and they will know that the previous organization was concerned. And then they will not employ that person to give them the opportunity to be in the same one-to-one situation with a girl or with a boy and to sexually abuse them. Now, from this information towards evidence-based practice, what I would like you to consider is because it's okay to be into the gut feeling, missing information or ambiguous, but just question yourselves, what am I doing to move the information from those three into the firm ground intelligence? Because we need to have the evidence, and the evidence will come from where? From your observations, from your experience. It will come from your skills into actually assessing and responding to the situations of safeguarding. So this is a very good tool that I would like to challenge you to use and to think, what is that intelligence that you actually have? And again, it's not just you working in isolation there, but it's you working with the other agencies to clarify what the concerns actually are. Now, I would like us to think about some new developments in safeguarding. And when we consider about these new developments or new terminology in safeguarding, please consider to what extent this apply to your current role. And let's see what we feel about it. The first one is about peer-on-peer abuse. We have learned, and we do know, that abuse actually can be perpetrated by adults, but also by children. Some children are very capable, and also they are abusing their peers. What do we mean by it? We are meaning sexual violence, sexual harassment, physical abuse, and there are some types there: hitting, kicking, shaking, pulling hair, shaking, all of those things. Sexting, it's a very, very new development, and more we are concerned about it. I remember watching some of the news earlier today, and funnily enough, it was this situation in one of the schools in Romania. It was a sexual sexting, and they said that it started like a banter between two girls, and then one of the girls posted the naked picture of the other girl onto the social media, and now it's a massive debate about that, and schools still don't know probably how to respond to that. And when the final part is initiation or hazing type violence, we've seen this very, very often in the American movies, probably when they did the baptize over fire or fire baptize. That was happening a lot there. But what we know is that, yes, peer-on-peer abuse is now, it's happening. It's been happening not just now, it's been happening years before. But now probably we are more aware about it, and we put it under this theme called peer-on-peer. So that's the first new development. The second one is called contextual safeguarding. What do we mean by it? We mean that abuse does not just happen inside the family homes. Abuse actually happens outside. Abuse happens beyond their families. We've seen children abused in school, for example. We've seen children abused whilst they attend services from our organization across the world. We've seen children being abused in football, a very, very, I would say, newish themes, and hopefully now we are addressing it and we are responding more and more to that. What we know about this one is that children do form relationships. We know when we are born as children, our social referencing, so everything that's important to us as babies, it is our parents or the ones that care for us. However, when we reach 10, 11, 12 years old, when we become teenagers, we know that the social referencing actually changes significantly. Those children are more likely to trust their friends, the people around them, rather than their parents. And because of that, we can say that they become vulnerable. We know that parents and carers, when this happens, they have sometimes very little influence about what is happening to their children. I know with social context, let's consider those. I mentioned, for example, football. At Terre des Hommes, probably you are aware that we partnered UEFA, and we are the key child protection partner for UEFA in actually tackling sexual abuse and all forms of abuse in football. And we know that that's starting to pay off. More and more, we are putting systems in place, and more, we are protecting children in football, around football, and also through football. So they are not experiencing any types of abuse there. So that's the second one. And then the third one that we are calling it county lines. And again, somebody told me, Paul, this is an English term. It is an English term, but let's see how it applies to us. What do we mean? We know that children as young as 12 and even younger than 12 are very, very vulnerable. Why? Because gangs, and not just in England, but in Europe, gangs have become very, very smart. They attract very, very young children. And when these children are used to do what? They are used to transport drugs. They are used to transport, let's say, crime weapons, and then also to dispose of the crime weapons after the crime is actually being committed. In England, at least, we are very worried that we have the highest number of 12 years old children drug dealers in that country. It's very, very worrying. we know that the two things that fall under or are under county lines is gangs and the impact on children because of being part of gangs. And also it could be sexual exploitation, and also it could be selling drugs or transporting drugs. Now, we know that these children could be moved between counties, but also between countries. Now, what I would like us to do is, because we have these three new terms, and these are peer-on-peer, contextual safeguarding, and county lines, I would like us to reflect and do this poll, please, the one that will appear on your screen in a second, to see to what extent these actually apply to your current area of work. And I'm just going to put it here. Is it this one? Yep. So please tick whether this applies to your role, and let's see what answers are we getting. And whilst you do that, I'm just going to take a moment to look at the questions that we have in the box. Okay, and I've seen a very good comment there. I don't have the name, but it says JIYAM. So it's about some of the factors are taboo. You are absolutely right in saying that. And you're just making me feel about ACEs or adverse childhood experiences. Let's put it this way. One of the ACE is domestic violence, for example. For me, I have to say unfortunate because I've traveled in many European countries and I talk about types of abuse. And what's interesting is that in England, we are saying domestic violence is a form of abuse. When we identify it, we need to act, and we are acting on it. And there are services available. In other countries, in Romania, probably, my birth country, I know when I go there, I see domestic violence as being swept under the carpet. And because of that, it's very difficult to act on it. But again, I don't want to sound like England is better or is wonderful in terms of safeguarding. It is not to some extent. Why? There was something in the news a few weeks ago when it was a report which was published by the UK government. And this report mentioned that victims of domestic violence in the rural parts of England, they suffer domestic violence longer, and they do not actually access support, and they do not have support. And why is that? Because the victim in a village, for example, will they be speaking to the others? No, they won't, because probably the perpetrator is a very well regarded person in that community. Okay, now I'm just going to end the poll and see what we have there. So practically you said that, no, most of us said that peer-to-peer definitely apply to us, contextual safeguarding only 64%, and then county lines 27%. Now let me just link that, and just county lines, I'll link that a little bit with what we do at Terre des Hommes. We know at Terre des Hommes in Europe, we have two main elements or pillars of work. One is juvenile justice, and the other one is migration. And we know that we are doing our best to support with migration, but we have identified, let's say, some children that arrive in the refugee camps in Greece, in other countries in Europe. We have identified recently that some of these children actually, they go missing from the camps. And when they go missing from the camps, we are also concerned that some of these children could be sexually abused or sexually exploited, or some of them could be involved to some degree in criminal activity. So from that point of view, we can say that county lines is actually there. And we need to be so attuned to this. Why? We have heard also as well that families and children who are in the refugee camps, we heard that a high number of them suffer of mental health. So when that's the situation, that makes them very vulnerable. It makes them very vulnerable. And then what happens after that? Perpetrators, even sometimes they are not gangs, they are sometimes isolated members of community, but with a very devious mindset. They attract these sorts of young people, they abuse them, and they involve them in all sorts of activities. And they start by being very charming. They start by actually grooming the children towards these sorts of activities. And that's why county lines can be used for this as well. We have also children, migrant children, who go missing, and we don't know where they are. To what extent do we know that these children are safe? We don't know. It's very interesting. And that's why these county lines probably shouldn't be for us as, let's say, organizations across Europe. We shouldn't say county lines. Probably we should say country lines or border lines, those sorts of things. And it's about the situation when the children are exposed to abuse because they are groomed by others, and then they are exploited, they are involved into substance misuse and other types of abuse there. Now, another message from I cannot see the name. It's Xperia Z5. I think human trafficking can also be related to country lines as new developments. Absolutely, I fully agree with you, and that's why I hope that this new concept can be used. So even if we don't call it like that, we can call it whatever we want. But it's very concerning that our young children or the children that are there are exposed to these types of abuse. Now, what I would like us to do is let's look at how we can assess safeguarding, for example, because sometimes it's difficult to pin it down. Now, I said earlier that we shouldn't make assumptions, but what we should make or what we could make, let's hypothesize. So how does this model actually work? I am concerned that, let's say, a migrant child, and this could be the issue, the migrant child often goes missing from the camp and nobody knows where he or she is or could be for about 72 hours. Now, what am I worried? I'm worried about the fact that this person has gone missing. Now, based on what I know at that moment in time, we can start hypothesizing. So we have there, I mentioned there, four explanations for the hypothesis. So it could be that this child is actually out looking for work. We've seen that happening. It could be that this child is involved with gangs and it's sexually exploited. It could be that this child is involved in substance misusing and dealing substances. It could be with the thing that this child is actually looking out for family and friends in the new location where they are, or it could be any other explanation there. Now, how this model works, so we made those explanations based on what we do at that moment in time. Now, this is a balance between information we know, or information that is supporting our explanation, and information that is opposing it. Now, based on, let's say, because after this, when I'm worried, what do? I aim to talk to the child and to get a little bit more information to understand better how to answer that. Why am I concerned? Based on new information, it might be that probably I'll rule out explanation 2 and explanation 4. I can rule them out, and then I'll stick to just 1 and 3. And it could be that based on finding some drugs on this person, based on them coming back very much beaten up, bruised eyes, bruised arms, those sorts of things, that will tell me that probably they're exposed at high risk, which could be criminal activity, it could be sexual exploitation. And we can do this model several times, but it's always trying to find the explanation which is less likely to be wrong, most likely to be right. And that's how we can balance that. And for safeguarding, this is very, very helpful. It's very helpful because we need to analyze the information and we need to decide based on the information that we are having about that situation at that moment in time. So please consider this model. But as I said, it's a work in progress, because never ever we will be able to know everything about the situation. But based on that, what do we hypothesize to be, there could be a risk or is a risk of harm. And then based on that, we need to decide how to intervene, how to stop that type of abuse if it happens. Now, what we know is that, and this is Eileen Monroe, she's done a lot of research and review into the child protection in England, but she said a statement which applies to all of us. So in this statement, she said that risk management cannot eradicate risk, it can only reduce the probability of harm actually happening. Even if you do everything in this world, children will still be abused. They will still be amongst us, some people that will abuse children. But what she also said, she said that through everything that we do, even through this webinar, we raise awareness, we find out more information, and we make sure that actually we do our part to tackle and to stop. And in many of the cases, we are saving the children. So I'd like us to think about that explanation, to think about that, and to consider to what extent through my work actually that child is safe or safer, given that I've done my part in keeping children safe. I know we are almost up to an hour, and I think, Tamas, now we're going to have time for some more questions.
Yeah, I think so, Paul. Thanks for keeping the time as well. We already had 2 questions in the chat.
Which ones are they?
One just to read loudly because it can be interesting for others.
Okay.
Like all partners have child protection policy. What we need to add to make it a child safeguarding policy?
Okay, very good question. Whoever posed that question, spot on. Thank you for doing that. Now, what do we mean? What is the difference between child protection and child safeguarding? The main, and again, there is a variety of answers to that. For me, I know safeguarding, we've seen what we say about it at the ZOM. And what is child protection? Child protection is to make sure that all children's needs are being met. That means the right of the child for health, education, development, all of those things, but also the right for protection. Now, even if we call it child safeguarding or child protection policy, it should say clearly in there the two principles that we discussed today, which is all children have the right to be protected. Also, there is another principle linked to that. Children are equal to the adults in the eyes of the law when we talk about child protection. And also we should respond in a child-centered way. And also we should respond in a multi-agency approach. And that's why there is another good statement that we have more and more and we use in safeguarding children. Doing nothing is not an option. So that could be a key statement in all of the child protection or child safeguarding policies. And also we need to do with rather than to children when we keep them safe. But again, I don't think there is a kind of one answer to this. But what we can do is, let's make sure that irrespective of how we call it, the child is safe at all the time, and nobody, professionals, carers, peers, nobody is actually abusing a child or exposing a child to a situation of risk. So that's the first question.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. But I think the time is out. So for Rob's question about due diligence process, let's take it offline, I would suggest, because we should keep the time. Okay. If you have any kind of other question, feel free to write us on the info.childhub.org, because later on we will be able to answer them as well. Paul, can I ask you kindly to launch the closing poll, please?
Yes, so as a closing thing, can I just say, I hope that we provoked some reflections today. I would like to invite you to take the reflection points and discuss it with your more colleagues, please. Discuss, even if it's just one point from today, discuss it with the others, because if you do that, we are building that momentum about keeping children safe. So we all become better at that because we talk to each other. Think also about how you apply it in practice. Think also what you can do next. And even if it's just a discussion with a supervisor, with a manager, with a colleague, I would thank you in advance for that, because this is how we're going to raise awareness more and more about keeping children safe. And just to reiterate a few messages that I've just said, always listen to the voice of the child. Let's make sure that we work with others and make sure that you do something rather than doing nothing. And just to say, I know it's been a lot of information, just say a big thank you. Your feedback is highly appreciated. So we do have a feedback at the end. Tell us good and bad about this. And also if you want to make contact with us, Child Hub is there. And also make contact with us individually if you want to talk more about safeguarding. But thank you for all the good questions. I think we had absolutely wonderful questions there. I hope it was useful, and please do your part and let's make sure that no child is hurt. Thank you very much and all the best to you.